It began on a frozen night in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Two park rangers were driving through the silent forest when their headlights caught a trembling shadow on the roadside, not a stone, but a dying mountain lion cub. They didn't know that stopping the truck that night would change everything, leading them into a story of compassion, law, and the strange love that can exist between humankind and the wild. Where true love sometimes comes with claws. The night was thin and cold across the Sierra Nevada range, the kind that made sound travel far, but warmth disappear fast. The truck's headlights sliced through the mist as Clara drove the narrow ridge road, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the radio. Ethan sat beside her, a thermos of coffee between his knees. They'd been on patrol for 6 hours, checking for illegal traps and fire signs. It was the kind of quiet shift no one complained about, until the beam of light caught something that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a small mound at first, a pile of brush or maybe a stone. But when the truck drew closer, it moved, barely. Clara slowed instinctively. "Did you see that?" Ethan frowned. Probably a raccoon or a coyote hit by a car. Happens all the time up here. She kept her eyes on the shadow, her voice calm but certain. "That's not a coyote." He sighed. "We're supposed to call wildlife control for stuff like this, Clara." But she was already stopping the truck. The engine hummed as she stepped out into the cold. The smell of pine and snow filled her lungs, sharp and clean. She walked toward the shape lying near the guardrail, her boots crunching the frost. When she knelt down, her flashlight revealed fur, golden brown streaked with dust and blood. The animal's ribs lifted in shallow, uneven breaths. A mountain lion cub, maybe 3 months old. Small, thin, trembling, her tail twitching once before going still again. Clara whispered, "Hey there, sweetheart." Ethan joined her, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. "You can't be serious. That's a mountain lion. We can't touch her. You know the law." "I know what I'm looking at," Clara said. "And she's dying." They stayed like that for a moment, both listening to the faint rhythm of life before it could fade. The cub didn't growl. She didn't even blink. She was too weak for fear. The forest was silent around them, just the low wind brushing the pine needles and the sound of a heartbeat they were both afraid to lose. Ethan shook his head slowly. "If we take her, it's on us. No one's going to back us up. The department doesn't want another illegal rescue case." Clara turned, eyes glinting beneath her hood. "Then let it be on me." He didn't stop her when she slid off her coat and wrapped the cub inside it, holding her as if she were made of glass. The animal's breath hitched but didn't fight. Clara felt the faint pulse against her palms, life clinging to the edge. She carried the cub to the truck, settled her in a box lined with a spare blanket, and whispered, "Stay with me, little one." Ethan got back in, wordless, his jaw tight. For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The heater roared. The road curved down toward the valley. When Clara finally broke the silence, her voice was quiet. "She must have been hit crossing the ridge. Maybe her mother's gone." "Or near," Ethan muttered. "And if she is, she'll smell us on the cub. That's how people get hurt, Clara." But she wasn't listening anymore. Her hand hovered over the bundle beside her, making sure the cub was breathing. "Call the rehab center in Truckee," she said. "They handle predators." He made the call. No answer. Tried another, then another. A tired voice on the 5th line finally spoke. "We don't take mountain lions without state clearance. Try Fish and Wildlife." They tried. The number rang 6 times and disconnected. By the time they reached the ranger station, it was almost midnight. The radio crackled faintly in the still air, but no one responded to their calls. The cub's breathing had grown shallow again, each rise of her chest a whisper against time. Ethan leaned on the counter, scrolling through contacts on his phone. "We did what we could. Let's leave her till morning. Someone higher up will deal with it." Clara's stare hardened. She won't make it till morning. Then what? You're gonna nurse her like a house cat? This isn't your job, Clara. You're talking about a wild predator. People lose fingers over animals like that. Clara looked at the cub. She didn't choose to be hit by a car. Something in her tone, low, steady, made Ethan pause. He rubbed his face, defeated. "We'll get fired if they find out." "Then they won't," she said, and carried the small creature into the back room of the cabin, where the old space heater hummed. She lined a laundry basket with towels, laid the cub gently inside, and sat on the floor beside it. Her hands trembled as she searched for any sign of injury she could treat. The back leg was swollen, fur matted with blood near the hip. A broken bone, maybe. The rest was starvation and shock. She found a dropper in a drawer, filled it with water, and touched it to the cub's lips. The first drop rolled down its chin. The second disappeared. Then the cub's ear flicked, just slightly, but enough to make Clara catch her breath. Ethan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You really think you can save her?" Clara didn't look up. "No, but I can try." He watched her for a long time, then muttered, "You're gonna regret this," before walking away. When the door closed, the cabin fell into deep silence. The heater buzzed. The snow outside thickened against the windows. Clara sat with the tiny body wrapped in her coat, listening to the faint sound of breathing. Every hour she checked again, adding a few drops of water, watching the small chest rise and fall. Around 3 a.m., the wind shifted. The temperature dropped. The cub's breathing grew irregular, her paws twitching weakly. Clara leaned closer, whispering, "Don't you quit on me now." Then, so soft she thought she imagined it, the cub opened her eyes, pale amber under the light. For a moment they locked on Clara's. Then, with a faint, broken hiss, the cub tried to lift her head. The sound startled Clara, but she smiled through the tears. "That's right. Fight me. Show me you're still in there." Ethan returned quietly just before dawn. He found her still sitting there, the cub alive, though barely. He stared at them both, the ranger and the wild thing, bathed in the orange light of the heater. "You named her yet?" he asked. Clara looked down at the bundle in her lap. "Not yet." "Well, you better start thinking, because now she's your problem." Clara didn't answer. She only brushed a hand along the cub's head, feeling the faint warmth under her fingers. "Then maybe," she said softly, "she's everyone's problem." Outside, the snow stopped falling. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a distant mountain lion's cry echoed through the trees, long, mournful, and ancient. The little cub stirred at the sound, her tail twitching once beneath the blanket, as if remembering where she came from. And in that fragile heartbeat of dawn, Clara realized saving her wasn't just about mercy. It was about hope, the kind that still existed, even in the wild. The storm passed, leaving the mountains silver and hushed. The small cabin smelled of pine wood smoke and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Clara hadn't slept. She sat beside the basket on the floor, her knees drawn up, one hand resting on the thin blanket that covered the cub. Every few minutes, she leaned forward, checking the rise and fall of its chest. By dawn, the mountain lion cub stirred. Her eyes blinked open, amber and wild. Clara smiled through exhaustion. "Hey there, little fighter," she whispered. The cub's pupils narrowed, and a low, raspy sound escaped her throat. It wasn't a meow. It was the faintest echo of a growl, ancient and instinctive. Ethan poured himself coffee, watching from the doorway. "She's getting stronger," he said. "That's good, until she remembers what she is." Clara didn't look up. "She's a baby. She just needs time." Ethan shook his head. "A baby mountain lion is still a predator. You know what happens when people get attached to wild animals. Look at the stories from fish and wildlife. It never ends well." She ignored the warning. The cub, weak but alert, tried to lift her head toward the sound of Clara's voice. Clara reached for a small syringe filled with water mixed with a little goat milk. She placed a drop on the cub's lips. The cub's tongue flicked out, hesitant, then again, this time with more strength. The fragile rhythm of survival began. Hour after hour, Clara fed her small drops, rubbed her paws to keep circulation, whispered softly like a prayer. She named her Luna, after the pale light that filled the cabin at night. Days passed. Luna began to stand. Clumsy at first, her legs shaky and thin. Each time she collapsed, Clara caught her before she hit the floor. When Luna hissed or swiped, Clara didn't pull away. She only whispered, "You're safe here." Ethan tried to stay detached. But the more time he spent watching Clara, the harder it became. One evening, he came back from the valley with a sack of meat. "Found a rancher willing to part with scraps," he said. "Figured she needs more than goat milk now." Clara smiled faintly. "See? You care." He poured coffee for them both, the kind that filled the small room with the smell of roasted beans and smoke. "I care about you," he said quietly. "Not about breaking federal wildlife laws." Clara said nothing. She tore small pieces of meat and placed them on a dish near Luna's nose. The cub sniffed, unsure. Her whiskers twitched, then she licked once, twice. Then she bit down, a soft growl vibrating in her chest. It was the first real sound of life since that night on the ridge. The next morning, Luna tried to climb. She scrambled onto a chair, then the table, knocking over a lantern in the process. Glass shattered across the wood floor. Ethan jumped. Luna froze, eyes wide, tail low. Clara's voice cut through the silence. "It's okay, Luna. It's just noise." But the cub's reaction was instinctive. She bolted toward the window. The pane cracked under her weight. Before Clara could stop her, Luna leapt through the broken frame into the snow outside. "Luna!" Clara's shout vanished into the wind. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and ran after her. They found the cub a few yards down the slope, limping, one paw bleeding from the glass. She tried to crawl under a fallen log, trembling with exhaustion. Clara knelt beside her, heart pounding. "Easy," she whispered. "No one's going to hurt you." When she reached out, Luna bared her teeth, her body a knot of fear. Ethan started forward, but Clara held up a hand. "Don't," she said softly. "Let her choose." Minutes passed. The wind carried the faint cry of an owl. Slowly, Luna's breathing steadied. Her body relaxed enough for Clara to slide her hands beneath her belly and lift her back into her coat. Luna didn't fight. Back inside, Clara cleaned the wound with warm water and antiseptic. "You just wanted to see the stars, huh?" she murmured. "Next time, I'll show you from the porch." Ethan stood at the door, the beam of his flashlight sweeping the broken glass. "She's not meant to be here, Clara. Look at her. Every instinct in her body is screaming to run. We're just delaying it." Clara looked up at him, tired but certain. "She's here because someone hurt her. She'll decide when she's ready." For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, the moon climbed higher, bright over the white ridge. The cub slept, breathing slow and even. Over the next week, Luna grew stronger and wilder. She began pacing the cabin, tail swishing, muscles rippling under her fur. Her eyes followed every sound outside. The cry of a hawk, the rustle of wind in the trees. Clara watched her with pride and quiet dread. One morning, Luna let out a sharp chirp, a sound so soft Clara almost missed it. She remembered reading that mountain lions make that noise to call for their mothers. The sound pierced her chest. She sat down beside the basket, whispering, "I'm not her. I know. But I'll keep you safe until you can find your way." That night, as Ethan fixed the radio, a deep roar rolled through the forest. Distant but close enough to make the window panes tremble. Luna froze, ears up, eyes wide. Then she answered, with a low growl that surprised them both. Ethan looked toward the dark ridge. "That's her mother," he said quietly. "She's out there looking." Clara's voice cracked. "If that's true, we can't take her back out there now. She can barely stand. She'll have to go someday." Clara turned away, tears in her eyes. Not tonight. The heater hummed between them. Luna pressed herself against the corner, caught between instinct and safety. The sound of the distant roar faded, swallowed by the snow. Hours later, Clara found herself awake again, watching the cub. She wondered if love for something wild could ever be right, if saving a life meant stealing its freedom. Luna shifted in her sleep, tail flicking softly, and Clara made her silent promise. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't let fear decide. Outside, the mountains glowed under the winter moon. Inside, two hearts, one human, one wild, beat to the same fragile rhythm of survival. By the time the snow began to melt, Luna was no longer the fragile cub Clara had wrapped in her coat that night. Her coat had deepened into gold, her movements quicker, her eyes sharper. She prowled the cabin like she owned it, stretching across the rug in the morning light, swatting at the curtain strings, testing every sound and scent that drifted through the cracked windows. Clara had built her a small pen behind the cabin with logs and wire mesh. Something to let her feel the open air, without letting her vanish into it. Ethan stood at the edge of the pen one morning, watching Luna pace. "You've turned her into a cat with prison walls," he said quietly. "How long do you think this can last?" Clara leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Until she's ready to leave." He shook his head. "It doesn't work that way. The law doesn't care about ready." It was meant as a warning, not a prophecy. But the words proved truer than either of them expected. 2 days later, a white state truck pulled into the clearing. The emblem of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife gleamed on the door. Clara's stomach dropped. She stepped outside, heart pounding, as 2 officers climbed out. One tall man with mirrored sunglasses and a woman with calm brown eyes carrying a clipboard. "Good morning," the woman said. "I'm Ruth Ramirez, field inspector. We've received a report about a mountain lion being kept on this property. Mind if we take a look?" Ethan froze. Clara forced a polite smile. "Of course, but she's recovering. Please be quiet around her." The moment they entered the pen, Luna stood still, tail twitching low. Her golden eyes locked on the strangers. A low growl rippled from her throat. Ruth crouched slightly, observing. "How long have you had her?" Clara hesitated. "Since December. We found her by the ridge road. She was dying." Ruth nodded slowly, taking notes. "You understand, it's illegal to hold a wild mountain lion without a Class 1 rehabilitation permit." "We called everyone," Ethan said quickly. "No one would help. I believe you," Ruth replied, her tone steady. "But belief doesn't replace regulation. This animal falls under state jurisdiction. You'll need to surrender her or apply for a special exemption." Clara's hands trembled. Surrender her? She won't survive in a holding cage. She needs care, not confinement. Ruth met her eyes. And that's why permits exist, to make sure care is done properly. You have 10 days to comply. The words hit like cold rain. When the truck drove away, silence filled the clearing. Ethan leaned against the fence, rubbing his temples. "That's it, Clara. We can't fight this. Let them take her before they decide to make an example out of us." Clara stared at Luna, who had returned to pacing. "You saw her when we found her. No one came. No one cared. Now that she's alive, everyone wants to decide what happens to her." "She's not ours," Ethan said softly. "I never said she was." Clara's voice shook, more from heartbreak than anger. "But she trusts us. That's worth something." The days that followed were tense. Clara tried to contact wildlife rehabilitation programs, sanctuaries, anyone who would vouch for her. Most never returned the call. One man laughed. "A mountain lion? Lady, that's not a pet rescue. That's an apex predator." Ethan began packing quietly, his resignation heavy in the air. One night, she found him loading his duffel bag into the truck. "You're leaving?" she asked. He looked at her with tired eyes. "You're obsessed, Clara. You've stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every call you make ends the same way. I can't keep watching you fall apart over something that doesn't belong to us." Her throat tightened. "If you go now, you'll never see what she becomes." "I'm afraid of what she'll become," he said, and closed the truck door. The sound of the engine fading down the mountain left a silence too big for the cabin. Luna pressed herself against the wire fence, restless, picking up Clara's distress the way animals do. Clara sat beside her pen for hours, whispering softly through the mesh. "I'm still here. You're not alone." That night, a heavy rain swept over the mountains. The power flickered. Luna paced endlessly, agitated by thunder. When the lightning flashed, she leapt against the fence, teeth bared. Clara grabbed a blanket, threw it over her shoulders, and ran into the storm. The rain stung her face as she knelt beside the pen. "Luna, calm down, baby. It's just noise." But the cub was no longer small. She reared up, claws scraping the mesh, snarling, a sound that cut through the wind like a blade. Clara didn't flinch. She stayed, whispering until the growls softened into low breaths. The storm passed, but Clara was soaked to the bone, shivering. Luna pressed her head lightly against the fence, and for the first time, Clara saw something in those golden eyes. Recognition, maybe even comfort. The next morning, the world looked washed clean. Clara stood by the pen, watching Luna bask in the new sunlight. Her muscles rippled with life, her breath steady. She was no longer a victim of pity. She was the wild itself, contained only by human fear. A sound broke the calm, a car on the gravel drive. Ruth Ramirez stepped out again, clipboard in hand. "It's been 10 days, Miss Porter. Do you have documentation of a permit?" Clara's stomach twisted. "Not yet, but I'm working on it. Please, just give me more time." Ruth studied her for a long moment. "You're not the first person to fall in love with something you were supposed to let go. But love isn't ownership. It's responsibility. I'll give you one extension. 30 days. If you can't secure a legal enclosure and a rehabilitation license by then, we'll have to remove her." Clara's voice cracked. 30 days? Ruth nodded. "Make them count." When the truck left again, Clara sank to her knees in the mud. The clock was ticking now, and she knew the mountain lion she loved could be taken at any moment. That evening, she pulled out the old laptop, searching every agency, every wildlife conservation group, every program for endangered species rehabilitation she could find. Each application came with fees, inspections, insurance, training certifications. More than she could afford. Still, she filled them out one by one, her fingers trembling on the keys. Luna watched her from the pen, silent. Outside, the forest whispered under the fading light. Inside, Clara whispered back to the wild, to the cub who had stolen her heart and nearly her sanity. "We'll find a way," she said. "I promise." The heater clicked off, the cabin dimmed, and the first stars returned over the ridge. Cold, bright witnesses to a woman's impossible vow. Spring came late to the Sierra Nevada that year, washing the ridges in fog and meltwater. Clara's 30 days had nearly run out. The paperwork for the wildlife rehabilitation license sat half-finished on the table beside stacks of state forms, inspection checklists, and bills she could no longer pay. The phone rang endlessly with rejections. No funding, no permit slots, no open sanctuaries. Each call ended the same. Another polite refusal wrapped in legal language. Luna sensed the tension. She'd grown lean and strong, her muscles coiling with every movement. The pen that once seemed safe now felt too small. At night, she paced until dawn, her tail slicing through the air like a question Clara couldn't answer. The bond between them had deepened into something wordless but fragile. Half trust, half wild instinct, waiting to snap. One morning, Clara noticed Luna hadn't eaten. The fresh venison lay untouched. By evening, the mountain lion lay in the corner of the pen, breathing unevenly. Clara opened the gate and knelt beside her. The animal didn't move. Her eyes looked dull, her belly tight. Panic rose in Clara's chest. She called every vet in the county. Most refused before she finished the sentence. "We don't treat apex predators," one voice said flatly. Another suggested euthanasia. She slammed the phone down, fighting tears. "She's not a monster," she whispered. "She's sick." By midnight, she drove through the rain to the next town, headlights cutting through sheets of water. A rural clinic answered her knock, only to lock the door when they saw the cage. The veterinarian, an older man with weary eyes, spoke through the glass. "I can't help you. Liability laws. I'm sorry." Back at the cabin, Luna was worse, her breathing shallow, her paws trembling. Clara wrapped her in a blanket, whispering through clenched teeth. "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." She searched online for any rescue group that would listen. The 7th number finally answered. A woman's voice, calm and certain. "This is High Desert Haven, wildlife rehabilitation out of Mojave," the woman said. "Name's Ruth. You said a mountain lion? How bad?" "She hasn't eaten for 2 days. Her abdomen's swollen, she can't stand." Ruth didn't hesitate. "Bring her here, now. Don't stop for anyone." The drive to Mojave took 5 hours through the mountains, and by dawn a sandstorm had risen across the desert. The wind carried dust thick as smoke, turning the horizon into a pale blur. Ethan met her halfway. He'd returned after weeks of silence, called by the same desperation that had driven her out. "You shouldn't be alone out here," he said, climbing into the driver's seat. "I couldn't wait," Clara murmured. "She's dying." They drove south, the road vanishing beneath the storm. Sand battered the windshield like rain. Clara held Luna in her lap, shielding her face with a towel. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're almost there." The cub's heartbeat fluttered against her palms. Every few minutes, Clara whispered words she didn't believe but needed to say, You'll make it. You'll see the sun again." Visibility dropped to nothing. Ethan leaned forward, squinting through the blur. "We should pull over. If we stop, she dies." The truck crawled along until the GPS lost signal. Dust coated the glass, choking the air vents. Then, through the storm, a fence appeared. Wire, sun-bleached signs, and the faint outline of a gate. A woman in goggles waved them forward. "You made it," she shouted over the wind. It was Ruth. She guided them into a barn lined with tarps and generators. The air smelled of antiseptic and sand. "Get her on the table," Ruth ordered. A young vet rushed in, gloved hands ready. He ran an ultrasound probe along Luna's abdomen. "For an obstruction," he said. "Something's lodged near the intestines. If we don't operate now, she won't last the night." Clara gripped the edge of the table. "Do it. Whatever it takes." The surgery lasted 2 hours. Clara sat outside the barn with Ethan, dust coating their coats, watching the storm die around them. Neither spoke. Every gust felt like a countdown. When Ruth finally stepped out, her mask pulled down, she smiled faintly. "She's alive. We removed bone fragments from an old carcass. Infection was bad, but she's strong." Clara exhaled for the first time in hours. Her hands shook. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Ruth said. "Let her rest. You two look like you could use that too." Inside the recovery stall, Luna lay beneath a heat lamp, breathing steadily. Clara and Ethan stayed on cots beside her, listening to the steady hum of the machines. At midnight, Luna whimpered, a soft, almost human sound. Clara's eyes filled instantly. She reached through the bars, resting her fingers near the animal's paw. "I'm here," she whispered. "You're safe." 3 days later, Luna lifted her head for the first time. Her golden eyes met Clara's through the dim light, weak but alert. A low purr, not quite domestic, but something close, rumbled in her chest. Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. "You're stubborn, you know that?" he said. "She learned from me," Clara replied. They stayed another week at High Desert Haven, helping clean enclosures, learning about rehabilitation protocols and the legal side of wildlife conservation. Ruth taught Clara how to document feedings, measure growth, and apply for nonprofit status to keep caring for Luna. "If you're serious about this," Ruth said one morning, "make it official. Turn what you did by accident into a mission." Clara looked out at the desert sky, endless and gold. Maybe that's what this was all along, a wake-up call. When the final inspection cleared, Luna was strong enough to travel. Ruth handed Clara a thick folder of papers and an address stamped with a state seal. "Finish what we started," she said. "Build her a home that keeps her wild but safe. You've earned that chance." On the drive back north, the desert faded behind them. The sky turned blue again, clear and forgiving. Luna slept in the carrier, her breathing slow but steady. Ethan glanced at Clara. "You realize this isn't over," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "It's just beginning." They drove in silence after that, the road winding through the canyons, the mountains ahead rising like a promise. Somewhere beyond those ridges waited a new life. For all three of them. The months that followed felt like another lifetime. Clara and Ethan sold the old ranger cabin and used every cent of their savings to buy 5 acres of scrubland near the foothills. A lonely stretch of earth where the wind smelled of sage and freedom. Together they built fences, dug trenches, laid out water lines. Ruth from High Desert Haven sent blueprints and occasional words of encouragement. The state inspectors came twice, measuring everything from gate locks to shade cover. When it was finished, Clara named the place Sierra Wild Refuge, a home for animals caught between danger and survival. Luna was the first resident. The new enclosure stretched across a slope of granite and oak, high enough to feel the wind and hear the coyotes at night. Luna moved through it like she'd been waiting for it all along, climbing, stalking, leaping onto the flat rocks to watch the valley below. Her scars healed into faint silver lines along her flank. Her body had filled out, muscles fluid under her coat. She wasn't a kitten anymore. She was a young huntress learning to trust the world again. Clara watched her every evening from the porch. "She's beautiful," she said quietly. Ethan nodded beside her. "She's wild again." The refuge began to grow. Word spread through wildlife conservation networks and environmental blogs. A wounded red-tailed hawk came in, then a raccoon with a broken leg. A local news story called Clara, the woman who saved a mountain lion. Donations trickled in through an animal rescue foundation link Ruth had set up. People mailed small checks and handwritten notes for Luna, for the wild things. Still, not everyone was supportive. The neighbors complained about the fences and the noise. Some feared Luna would escape. One afternoon, a young reporter arrived unannounced, camera in hand. "I'm doing a piece on the woman who lives with a mountain lion," he said with a grin. Clara sighed. "I don't live with her. She lives here. There's a difference." He followed her to the enclosure. Luna was stretched on a rock, eyes half closed, basking in the sun. The camera clicked. The flash went off. Luna startled, tail lashing. In a blur of motion, she leapt from the rock and slammed against the fence with a snarl that shook the air. The reporter stumbled back, pale. Clara ran forward, holding out her hands. "It's okay, girl. It's okay." Luna's breathing slowed, but her eyes stayed wide and alert. The tension bled away only when Clara crouched and whispered softly until Luna's muscles eased. Ethan appeared from the house, furious. "I told you no visitors near the pen." The reporter stammered an apology and left. But by that evening, the video clip had hit social media. Mountain lion lunges at reporter during private sanctuary visit. Within hours, the story spread. Some praised Clara for her courage. Others demanded the refuge be shut down. Days later, a state officer arrived to evaluate safety concerns. Clara handed over the paperwork, every inspection certificate in order, but the officer's tone was cold. "One more incident like this and your permit could be suspended." That night, Clara sat on the porch, staring at the dark outline of Luna's enclosure. "They don't understand," she whispered. Ethan set a mug of tea beside her. "Maybe they don't have to. You built this for her, not for them. But they'll take her away if they think she's dangerous." He rested a hand on hers. "She's not dangerous. She's honest. There's a difference." The next morning, Clara stepped into the enclosure for the first time since the incident. Luna stood a few yards away, tail flicking. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Luna walked forward slowly, stopping within arm's reach. She lowered her head, pressing it gently against Clara's shoulder. The contact was brief, but it broke something open in her. "You could leave any time," Clara whispered, "but you stay." Luna blinked once, then turned and padded back toward the rocks. It felt like an answer. The following week, the refugee received an unexpected grant. Wildlife rehabilitation funding from a conservation nonprofit impressed by their resilience. The money covered new enclosures, veterinary supplies, and solar panels. More injured animals arrived. A coyote hit by a car, a pair of orphaned fawns. Ethan handled the logistics, Clara handled the care. Through it all, Luna watched from her domain, the silent guardian of the place she had inspired. But peace never lasted long. A rumor started online that Sierra Wild Refuge was training predators for profit. Someone leaked the old reporter's video, claiming it showed proof of aggression. The phone began to ring again. Reporters, inspectors, strangers with threats. One night, as the wind howled across the hills, Clara walked out to Luna's pen and sat on the ground outside the fence. Luna padded closer, her golden eyes glowing in the dark. Clara spoke softly, her voice trembling. "They want to shut us down, Luna. They think fear is reason enough." Luna tilted her head, ears flicking at the sound of her name. She didn't move closer, but she didn't turn away either. Clara reached through the mesh, her fingers brushing the cool air between them. "If I lose everything else, I'll still have this. You. The proof that compassion matters." Ethan found her there hours later, asleep against the fence. He covered her with a blanket, looked at Luna and murmured, "You really did change her life, didn't you?" A week later, the inspectors returned for the official review. They checked every bolt, every latch, every medical record. When it was over, the lead officer gave a slow nod. "Everything's compliant. Keep it that way." Clara exhaled, relief washing over her. As the truck left, Ethan smiled. "Looks like she gets to stay." Clara turned toward the pen. Luna stood on the highest rock, framed by the sunset, her coat glowing bronze in the fading light. The wind lifted, carrying the distant echo of the wild hills. "She was never ours to keep," Clara said softly. "But maybe she chose us anyway." Ethan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Then maybe that's enough." They stood there as the day faded into gold and quiet, the refuge behind them alive with small sounds, the flap of wings, the rustle of leaves, the heartbeat of something larger than themselves. And above it all, Luna watched, silent and proud, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if she already knew the story wasn't over yet. Winter came quietly that year, sliding down from the Sierra peaks like a sigh. Frost kissed the fences each morning, and the hills around Sierra Wild Refuge turned white and still. Clara wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee, watching her breath drift into the air. The refuge had grown into something real, registered, insured, and fully recognized by the Department of Wildlife Conservation. They had volunteers now, sponsors who sent donations through animal welfare programs, and wildlife blogs that called the sanctuary a model of compassion in motion. Yet even with success, Clara felt something missing. Luna had grown into a full adult, nearly 7 feet from nose to tail, her muscles rippling like liquid sunlight. She no longer played or paced restlessly. She simply stood at the edge of her enclosure every dusk, watching the ridgeline as if waiting for someone or something beyond it. One cold morning, Clara stepped out with her usual bucket of meat. Luna didn't come. The enclosure was still, the snow smooth except for faint paw prints leading to the far corner of the fence. The gate hung slightly ajar, a lock bent where the metal had twisted against pressure. For a moment, Clara thought her heart had stopped. "Ethan," she shouted, "she's gone." He ran from the house, scanning the tracks that led toward the pines. "She didn't break out," he said softly. "She walked out." They followed the trail for a mile until it vanished in the drifts. The silence of the woods pressed around them. No calls, no movement. It was as if Luna had melted back into the wilderness that had made her. Clara stood motionless, tears freezing against her cheeks. "Maybe this is how it was always supposed to end," she whispered. That night, she left the gate open. Snow drifted through, covering the ground inside the pen. For weeks, she checked every morning, hoping for a sign, a track, a shadow, a sound. Nothing came. The other animals healed and moved on. The refuge continued its work, but Clara's evenings grew quieter. Sometimes she would stand by the open gate, whispering into the wind, "Be safe out there, girl." In February, heavy snow blanketed the hills. The power went out twice, and volunteers stayed home. One early morning, Clara stepped outside to check the generators. Her boots sank deep in the powder. That's when she saw them. Tracks, faint but unmistakable, circling the property. Big, fresh. She froze, heart pounding. "Ethan!" He came running, flashlight beam cutting across the snow. The prince led toward the back fence, disappearing into the grove of frozen oaks. "Could be a wild one," he said carefully. Clara's throat tightened. Or it could be her. That night, the wind howled through the valley. The moon rose cold and bright. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the kitchen window, staring at the dark line of the trees. Then, just after midnight, something moved, a shape gliding through the snow, silent and graceful. Two golden eyes caught the light. "Ethan," she whispered. He joined her at the window. "Oh my God." Luna stood there, just beyond the fence, her coat dusted in frost. She was thinner, but strong, her breath clouding in the air. And she wasn't alone. At her side, half hidden by her legs, was a smaller shape. A cub, maybe 3 months old, peeking out with wide, uncertain eyes. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. She had a baby. Luna stepped closer to the fence. The cub followed, stumbling in the snow. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then Luna lowered her head and placed the cub near the gate. The tiny creature mewed softly, curling against the cold. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "She brought her here," Ethan murmured. "She remembers." Luna lifted her gaze to Clara. It was the same look she'd given years before in the cabin, the look that had changed everything. Clara opened the gate slowly, kneeling in the snow. The cub didn't run. It only looked up at her, blinking. Luna stood still on the other side, tail flicking once, as if saying goodbye. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees, her paw prints swallowed by falling snow. Clara gathered the small cub in her arms, wrapping it in her coat. The tiny heartbeat fluttered against her chest, warm and alive. She whispered, "You're safe now, little one. Your mama knew where to bring you." At dawn, the volunteers arrived to find Clara sitting on the porch with the cub sleeping in her lap. The air smelled of pine and hope. Ethan came out with coffee, his eyes tired but soft. "Guess the refuge just got another resident." Clara smiled through her tears. "No," she said gently. "Just another story." They built a small enclosure beside the house, lined with straw and warmth lamps. The cub thrived quickly, eating, playing, learning to climb. Visitors who came to the refuge often asked about Luna. Clara would point to the ridge and say, "She's out there somewhere, still watching." Months later, spring returned. The snow melted, and the hills came alive with wildflowers. The young cub, whom Clara named Soleil, the French word for sun, grew bold, climbing every rock and chasing butterflies across the grass. At sunset, Clara often saw a shadow moving along the ridge, silent and golden in the light. One evening, she stood by the open gate, her voice soft against the wind. "Thank you, Luna, for teaching me what freedom really means." She looked down at Soleil, who sat beside her, watching the same horizon. "And for sending me a piece of you back." The refuge thrived after that. More animals arrived, more lives were saved. People wrote letters about compassion and courage, about how one act of kindness could ripple across the wild. Clara never sought fame, but her story spread through wildlife documentaries and nature preservation articles, inspiring donations to animal rescue organizations nationwide. When Afurainest night fell, she still left the gate slightly open. Not enough for anything to enter, just enough for the wind to whisper through. She liked to imagine Luna passing by sometimes, circling the sanctuary she had once called home, still guarding it in her own wild way. Under the starlight, Clara would whisper the words that had carried her from the start. She wasn't ours to keep, but she chose to come back. The mountains answered with silence, the kind that feels alive. And somewhere out in that silence, a lioness walked through the snow, free, fierce, and remembered.